Let's turn now to the form of authorization. Before a gaining registrar may initiate a transfer at the registry, it must obtain express authorization from one of the domain's transfer contacts and enter into a new registration agreement for the domain. For the purposes of the transfer policy, the registered nameholder and the administrative contact, as identified in the domain's WHOIS record, are the transfer contacts. As a first step, the gaining registrar must obtain WHOIS data from either the registrar of record or the registry for the domain name for which a transfer is being requested. Next, the gaining registrar must transmit the standardized form of authorization for gaining registrars to one of the transfer contacts. The Form of Authorization for Gaining Registrars, or FOA, is available on ICANN's website at this address. The FOA must be used for all GTLD transfers and generally cannot be modified, except that a translation may be provided in addition to the English version. If you translate the FOA, keep in mind that the gaining registrar is responsible for the accuracy and completeness of the translation. In the event of a dispute related to a transfer request, the review process will be conducted in English. Please take a look at the standardized FOA. The first section in the form explains why the recipient is receiving the form. The second area explains that the transfer contact must enter into a new registration agreement with the gaining registrar and advises that it may not transfer the registration again for 60 days following the transfer. The third area informs the transfer contact that it must affirmatively confirm the FOA in order to complete the transfer and provides instructions for doing so. The FOA may be transmitted electronically or on paper. When a paper version of the FOA is used, the gaining registrar must ensure that the transfer contact has signed the form. The gaining registrar must also retain a paper copy of the losing registrar's WHOIS output for the domain. The gaining registrar is responsible for obtaining reliable evidence that the transfer contact is who he or she claims to be to ensure that the person making the transfer request is authorized to do so. Acceptable forms of proof of identity include a notarized statement, valid driver's license, passport, articles of incorporation, military ID, state or government-issued ID, and a birth certificate. The gaining registrar must make sure to keep records that prove this evidence was collected. We'll discuss this retention requirement in more detail in a later topic. Just as the gaining registrar must validate a transfer contact's identity when using a paper form, identity must also be validated when using an electronic form. If an electronic FOA is used, there are two acceptable forms of identity. The first is consent from an individual or entity that has an email address matching the transfer contact's email address in WHOIS. The second acceptable form of identity is an electronic signature that conforms with national legislation in the location of the gaining registrar.